piccolo, vieni, vieni, vieni piccolo, vieni, vieni piccolo, vieni, vieni piccolo, vieni, piccolo, vieni piccolo, vieni, 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 piccolo, vieni, oh, eccoci, oh, piccolo, vieni, vieni, piccolo, vieni. The attraction of St. Francis, the Poverello of Assisi, is massive and always has been. I remember even as a child being with my mother at Assisi, at the very place where he's buried there. It's in the lower part of the basilica. And my mother said to me, it's very simple, as he would have liked it to have been. And still a Protestant, I remember, while reading history at the age of 13, coming across the birth of these mendicant movements in the Middle Ages and being struck by the verse that was quoted in the history book. If thou wilt be perfect, go sell all that thou hast and give to the poor, and come follow me. I remember going down on my knees at that point, having read it, and saying to the Lord that that's what I wanted. I was giving my life to him because I felt that that was directly the gospel. But the interesting thing there is that St. Francis is seen, even by evangelicals, as a gospel figure who took ad literam the invitation of the Master. And it seemed a beautiful way. Francis shed everything. He was free. And one understands, therefore, how at the age of 18, Clare was influenced by his powerful preaching at Assisi and went to join him at the Portiuncula. He had reconstructed that church, and in it many graces had come to him. He arranged for her to be formed in a Benedictine monastery, and then, having restored the church of San Damiano at Assisi itself, he gave them the adjacent building as their convent. And we know that he had experiences before the cross of San Damiano. The cross was always in his life. As in the case of St. Catherine of Siena, the cross would have been of a somewhat Eastern style, two-dimensional and not three-dimensional. St. Catherine had the stigmata before that cross in the 1300s in Siena. The Blessed Sacrament was not at that time placed in the same manner as it would be now. The progressive centralization and physical honouring of the Blessed Sacrament as we know it was influenced strongly by the Council of Trent. In earlier times, the cross was often the centre of people's devotion and prayer, and so many experiences happened before that cross. A similar thing happened to St. Bernard, the founder of the Olivetan Benedictines, Bernardo Tolomei. Bernardo Tolomei died while helping in the plague in Siena, so we don't know exactly where his tomb is. But it's said the Lord spoke to him for the cross, which is still honoured there at Monte Olieto Maggiore. Then Clare went on to be head of that community of Holy Virgins at Assisi, the poor Clares who have survived to this day. They had actually a papal privilege to be completely dependent on Providence and not to have to handle the goods of this world. They were following in that the principle of the Poverello himself, who wanted to be free and not bound to the material. We forget how radical this movement was. They were cracking the structure of the monastic life and trying to get back to the freedom of the gospel itself. It gave them huge power of evangelization in Europe, and it was contained within the church. It could have gone astray, but with great heads like St Bonaventure down the line, things were kept within the bounds of orthodoxy and fidelity. It is within that the church has to be reformed, and not without. There is a providence in things. I remember at the age of 15, 16 trying to get involved with the Franciscans and hoping to enter straight at the age of 16, but it wasn't going to happen. They always kept pushing things back. But the ideal was there. I remember in school days seeing the film, actually with my parents, of Zeffirelli, Brother Sun, Sister Moon. It was very moving. And also having a book in Welsh on St Francis, which is interesting because even in Wales he is respected, Wales being a Protestant country. And that film was so moving that the inspiration was strong. Who would have known that later on in time I'd actually celebrate my first Mass at the altar which is in that film, because part of it was filmed at St Antimo when it was still empty. And the scene with the wolf is of St Francis shielding himself within the church, which is a kind of symbolic way of putting it, from the forces outside. But that door is the door that I would open and close as sacristan in the morning and in the evening. It's a very big door, ancient, huge, and has to be bolted strongly. That church would have been of the period, and therefore it was a good place to do that filming. The bonding between Francis and Clare is an example of spiritual friendship, commented upon with great beauty by our own Aelred of Rivaux, the good abbot. His monastery was always full. He took in everybody. He was greatly loved by his brethren. But he has a treatise on spiritual friendship. One day in the monastery in Italy, at St Antimo precisely, I received a letter from this poor Clare, and so I wrote back, and I happened to be giving a course at that time on spiritual friendship using St Aelred for our own novitiate. And this letter came back. They hadn't got that course, could they have it? So I gave it to them as well. And it's something important to be aware of, that the quality of relationship in community and in life gives quality to the whole of life. And if we're not good at relationship, we are dysfunctional in our whole life, and there's only unpeacefulness around us. It's good to go through life without enemies. It takes two to make an enmity, but only to have peaceful relations with all around us. It's actually the doctrine of St Paul as well. As far as in you lies, he says, be at peace with all men. There are usually ways of obtaining peace if one is somewhat diplomatic. One has to know when and where to say something and how to say it, if it has to be said at all. the wrong time and the wrong place can have no effect, or just the contrary. And also with regard to forming others, it was important to do so without hurting their soul. The ways and means of obtaining an effect with a twinkle in one's eye, which is very difficult if one is wanting to do it straight away. It's a different way of doing it from just attacking on that spur of the moment and hurting and offending. There are many examples of beautiful spiritual friendship in the Christian annals. One looks at St Catherine of Siena, who would have used St Anselm, and her bonding with the eventual head of the order, actually, later on. This was Blessed Raymond of Capua, and he would call her Mamma. They had an amazing understanding of each other, very homely. Even at times bordering on the toying with the miraculous, because there is an occasion, at least on one occasion, when the Lord interrupted the celebration of a Holy Mass in private that St Raymond, or Blessed Raymond, was celebrating. He hadn't the intention of celebrating that day at all, but he was moved to suddenly. And the host at the fraction, part of it jumped, and he couldn't find it anywhere. And when he eventually came to Catherine, who couldn't move at that point, she was very ill, he saw that there was a twinkle in her eye, and he understood what had happened. The Lord had brought the host to her. Now, these things are only possible in the Lord. One sees it also in the founding of the Visitation Nuns. When Jane Frances de Chantal first saw the bishop, François de Sales, Francis of Sales, preaching, she heard in her heart, "C'est lui," it's him, and she knew that it had to be that man who would guide her, and he did. Saint Vincent de Paul, collaborated with a holy nun also, Marguerite, to found the Daughters of Charity. St Margaret Mary Alacoque was completely unable to do anything if it weren't for the help and contact with her spiritual father, who was able to diffuse in her name and that of the Lord the devotion to the Sacred Heart which had been given to her. He was a Jesuit, and hence to this day the Jesuits are the propagators thereof. St Claude de la Colombière, her spiritual director, was faithful to the end. And there's actually a picture which is quaint, the large heart, the Sacred Heart, and then two little hearts, one in each corner at the bottom of the icon. One is his and one is hers. They were bonded in the Lord, in his heart. And it is a blessing if one can, over one's spiritual life, have someone that one can be comfortable with. There is a passage in the life of our Holy Father St Norbert which says that he would lean his soul upon evermode. He would find refreshment in his soul. The Poor Clares have a great devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. In fact, the convent that I was involved with there had perpetual adoration day and night. That can be seen also in the life of Clare herself, who had recourse to the master of the house, the Lord, to protect his house when there was a danger of the place being ransacked by Saracens. There were quite a few of them in the army of the Emperor, Frederick II. She had the courage to present herself at the wall of the convent with the Blessed Sacrament, and miraculously they were driven back. Hence how she is presented in iconography to this day. She never left the convent, she just burned as a lamp until death, giving off light and warmth, and that's what the poor Clares do. A hidden presence, close to the Lord and close to his heart. The heart that loves the Lord loves the members of the Lord, and it is important to be in a spirit of warmth and not of bitterness as we go through life. To consecrate oneself to the Lord is not to consecrate oneself to negativity, but to positiveness, and that means love, not a quenching thereof. It hit me some time ago when looking at all these houses in Italy, how many of them are expensive. The same is true here in Ireland. But is every house a home? Is there warmth therein? We can have much on the material level, but the spiritual can be very, very poor. Whereas quite often, those who have little sometimes have a simpler life and a more peaceful life, able to enjoy precisely simple blessings and not making too many demands. The soul that needs the material is bound to condemn itself to profound unhappiness. It's looking in the wrong area. A friend. We travel on a lonely homeward road upon this empty globe, where many men walk far and wide, side at home and sealed abode, that others may not tread. A hovelled den, away, away from all, is all I see on this idyllic land, where stand well grasped the chateaus and the palaces of glee, that dreams knew well to buy, and wallets clasped. Yet there are moments when a little gleam made all of looking well have held a home, not of hard mortar struck, but of a dream of being bold, of being told to come and hide a little in a shelter frail, that made of nothing did in nothing fail.